Welcome to a new installment of the Climate Change Resiliency series on CityCast. Today we'll be talking to the Executive Director of the Bay Area Restoration Council, McLaughlin. We'll start off with how Chris got involved with BARC and then listen as he describes the type of work that the organization is involved in and their relationship with the city. Chris also talks about the problem of subjective data metrics and explains why he thinks Hamilton must handle stormwater more effectively. Before we move on with the episode, be sure to check us out on our social media accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at CityLAB SIR to stay up to date on all things related to the semester in residence. And now, on with the episode.
So in 2011, when I finished my research into the implementation of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, that's a binational agreement between Canada and the United States to restore the Great Lakes. And so my research was sort of at 30,000 feet. And then later in 2011, I got this job. So now I came right down on the ground to stuff that was going on here locally. So you know a little bit about BARC, a little bit about what we do. We have 3 or 4 staff that swells to 5 or 6 staff in the summertime. My job is first and foremost to think of all of the stuff that we can do to get people to pay us enough that we can make payroll every month. That's my job, is to make sure that everybody gets paid and everybody has a direction that they can work towards. And also, of course, I have a board of directors. And legally, the board of directors are volunteers, but they technically own the organization. We're a charitable nonprofit corporation. So legally, they own the organization, even though they're volunteers. And the job of a board of directors is to set policy, to adopt a strategy, and then hire a chief executive, that's me, to fulfill that. And then my job is to hire other people with the resources available to try and do that. So just to give you a couple of examples of the things that we've done in the last couple of years, one of the categories of the remedial action plan for Hamilton Harbor is called degradation of aesthetics, or just aesthetics. So sort of how does the water look and smell to the average person? There are other categories. They're called beneficial use impairments, or BUIs. There's a lot of acronyms. The remedial action plan is the RAP. RAP involves 11 categories relevant to Hamilton Harbor. Of the 14 that might impact other areas in the Great Lakes. They're called areas of, there's lots of acronyms. AOCs, that's an area of concern. So we get this, in Hamilton, we get this label, area of concern. And the idea is to implement a remedial action plan to get rid of the label. We want to reduce the impacts on water quality. We want to remediate contaminated sediment, for example. We want to do things that create, restore habitat. And in restoring habitat, we have places for other things to live, like populations of fish and wildlife, for example. Those fish and wildlife, we hope to see the levels of contamination in their tissue dropping, and that's been happening slowly over time. And so in 2018-19, we did a status report for the federal government on the degradation of aesthetics, beneficial use impairment, trying to figure out how to measure and report and assess how the water looks and smells. And it's very challenging because unlike in a presentation about the contaminants in fish tissue or the amount of habitat restored in the marsh, for example, there are subject area experts that the RAP employs through the federal or provincial or other governments, agencies, or others, particularly McMaster, for example. And they determine the trends, they collect the data and assess, and they write very technical assessments of the status, right, of how we're doing. Do we have enough habitat yet? How are the fish populations, that sort of thing. When it comes to how the water looks and smells, everyone is a subject area expert. Everyone has a legitimate opinion. So it makes the ability to assess very challenging, let's say. So it's using all of my academic research abilities to try and figure this out. And some days, honestly, I wish that I'd never heard of this project before and I'd gone after somebody else's money. But seriously, it's fun because it's challenging, but it's what we're doing is, and I think some of your questions point to this. We're trying to figure out where we are on this sliding scale of working towards sustainability or good enough or whatever that is for people. And there's a huge range of opinions about that, and there's a huge challenge in trying to measure, calculate that progress.
A lot of the other cities we talked to also are currently working on metrics. So a big thing was deciding how we're going to measure how successful we are. And I guess with something like aesthetics, it would be incredibly difficult. So are you developing like a survey for residents or something?
Yeah, so there's been a number of AOCs in Canada, the United States, that have, it's called, redesignated this category. So as I said, there's 11 categories that have in Hamilton that have to do with contaminated sediment, fish and wildlife populations, habitat, water quality. With this one, part of the problem is that there had, up until 2018, there had been almost no thought given to measuring. So we don't have a measurement of even of what people thought. Never mind, do we have a measurement that we still agree with or is useful and has a track record of data that have been collected, unlike water quality, where we've got 40 years of record keeping on water quality sampling at the same places. We don't have anything like that. So part of the issue is, and you will find this, is that without that track record, it's your ability to assess whether things are getting better is very limited, and you're almost left just with the current circumstances. And in that situation, your challenge is to get everybody on the same page. Does everybody even agree that we're talking about a problem? If people don't agree that there's even a problem, you're not even starting from, you don't even have a starting place with people. So they may or may not see that if there's a problem, that there's a path forward that needs, to be, if you don't, it's not like these lunatics having these protests over whether there's a pandemic or not, right? Is climate change affecting me personally? Well, ask a million people, get a million opinions, or a very large, range of opinions, right? And so this will be, as you start out thinking about how to measure how well things are going, and who to speak to, and about what questions to ask, what measures to compare. So across the Great Lakes in these areas of concern that have part of the issue also was that it's good that every place was in some ways able to develop these remedial action plans locally. So in various places in the United States, mostly, they used a whole variety of methods. So they might have, in some places, they used the number of complaints that people had made. Like there's a pipe and it's launching some really smelly stuff into the river. It's leading into the harbor. They would literally count the number of times the agencies involved in that remedial action plan received those calls. And I guess they just set some arbitrary benchmark. If we get more than 5 of those in a year, it must be really bad. But 4, I guess, is like, that's okay. And so somewhere, and again, right, when you're dealing with anything that is subjective, where how people think and feel about it based on their own experience rather than some objective measure, like, is that piece of wood long enough? Well, I don't know. If it won't stretch all the way over there where I can put a nail in it, I guess it's not, right? I mean, 10 feet. And if your piece of wood is 8 feet, well, then we can determine that is too short. But, is the water clean enough? Well, I don't know. I mean, what do you want to do? What is the objective, right? What is the use? And in that case, you're going to get a lot of answers based on the relative contamination, I guess, of that water. If the use is, to further contaminate it, you're some sort of wayward industry, I guess the answer is it doesn't really matter how clean it is. But if you're looking to go boating, that would be one answer. If you're looking to eat fish out of water, well, then that's a whole other level of acceptable contamination, right? And then again, you get people where there's absolutely no contamination is acceptable. And so you have this huge range, right? The method that we used had been used in Toronto a couple of years earlier and it hasn't been officially accepted yet, but effectively they're going ahead with the process that they had used there. And it was a way of measuring on a scale of 1 to 10. Is the water cloudy? Is it opaque? Is it clear? Does it have a color? And I can tell you that it sounds like it should be pretty straightforward. But in fact, when you stand on the shoreline and you look down at water, say at Bayfront Beach at the boat launch, picked places like this all around the harbor that had public accessibility, right? Where a place where people would be inclined to go and hang around right by the water. We have several years of data that Environment Canada had been collecting out in the middle of the harbor, where they have a spot where they're measuring water chemistry. Almost nobody ever goes to the middle of the harbor or has any idea what the water is like out there. I can assure you, and I have some other stories I'm happy to tell you about our efforts to reintroduce safe swimming into the harbor and the water quality data that we've been collecting. But just to wrap this little thing up about aesthetics and measuring and so forth, because I think it is, I'm telling you this being a little heavy on the details, I guess, because I think this is actually relevant to the kind of project that you're envisioning, right? So we went to places like that, and I can tell you that it's actually not easy to determine whether the water has a slight tinge of color to it, because the sun is shining. Is it the color sort of the concrete underneath the first foot of water or so that's where the boat launch is? Am I seeing color in the water that's reflecting from the concrete? Does the color change a few feet over as it gets deeper? And where am I supposed to be measuring anyways? Like as far as I can see out to whether or not that's a piece of trash 50 feet away, or is it all just within the shoreline? So just the internal conversations amongst you four is a challenge, right? To figure out what are we asking people and how do we ensure that the questions we ask collect the kind of answers that are going to matter to us in the end. And so that's a careful consideration. I mean, if it makes you feel any better, the last conversation I had with a number of partners, including the federal government, which is paying for this project this year, and the provincial government, which is also one of the senior partners in this initiative, they're not actually agreeing on sort of a path forward. So I have a bunch of data that I've collected based on a protocol that not everybody agrees with, which is somewhat frustrating. And now it's almost December and I'm running out of time to do anything about this, right? So that's frustrating as well. I mean, you're literally probably going to have many of the same conversations that we've been having working on this project, which is.
I know you spoke about a lot of the challenges with dealing with this kind of thing and the subjectivity of climate change issues, but in your opinion, what is the most pressing issue for Hamilton at the moment? If you could fix one issue, what would that be?
Well, given the work that I do, it's going to be water related. And I would say, hands down, it's dealing with stormwater more effectively. We have two kinds of sewer systems in Hamilton. Up until about 1970, development had what's called a combined sewer. So there's one pipe under the street. This goes from all through the downtown into Dundas and south on the mountain to about probably Mohawk Road or thereabouts. One pipe that catches all of the sanitary waste from homes and buildings and all of the stormwater into one pipe, which is great because that means that all the stormwater, as it rushes off the hard landscape like roads and parking lots, picking up contaminants, all kinds of dirt, heavy metals, oils and greases and stuff that you just don't want in creeks and in the bay and the marshes. All of that is going to the wastewater treatment plant. The problem comes when the system is backed up, either because the pipes hit 100% or there is too much water trying to get through the plant at the same time. And the wastewater treatment plant is effectively a big biology project, and it can only move at a constant rate. It can only move at a certain rate. It can't go faster just because it's raining hard. And so the water will back up, and that has to go either out into the environment, which is a combined sewer overflow into surface water somewhere like Shadow Creek, or it goes backwards until it bubbles up and fills our basements. So we have these two crappy choices. The city has done a number of things like build big, huge holding tanks, one of them which is behind the Fortinos on Dunduran Street. So it's in that little triangle of a park back there. Down below is an absolutely monstrous cavern that fills up with stormwater in really heavy rainfalls. And then, of course, because people don't stop flushing the toilet because it's raining out, it's what would normally be just a regular flow of sewage to the treatment plant now becomes an overwhelming amount of sludgy waste because of all this stormwater. So south of Mohawk Road is a separated system in Ancaster for the most part in Waterdown. And so in a separated system, you've got two pipes. So you have one taking the sanitary waste from your homes, and it's big enough. It's designed to hold all of the waste that would come from the surrounding development. So there's really not much chance that it's going to overflow because the stormwater is traveling in a separate pipe, hence the term separated system. So the stormwater in that separate pipe is not heading to the water treatment plant. It is designed to take all of the waste, all of the stormwater off the surface and send it to a creek or some sort of stormwater infrastructure somewhere, like a big pond. So a lot of people would be familiar with the one that's on as you head up the hill on the 403, if you right past the Aberdeen exit, if you're going up towards Ancaster, on the right-hand side, there's a big open area that's designed to hold stormwater. So unlike that underwater combined system, that one's designed to take runoff and just hold it there. And in the same way that the CSO, the combined sewer overflow tanks, are designed to hold on to all of that until the storm passes, and then the plant can get caught up with all of that. The problem, though, with the separated system, even though you don't have the sewage overflowing into creeks, you're still collecting up all of that surface material. So any heavy metals, any material that we don't want in water, not to mention, pet waste and other kinds of stuff that gets picked up. So bacteria, all kinds of chemical, bacteria, biological and chemical waste is then traveling across parking lots and into surface water. So that's also a problem, right? That we need to figure out a way to deal with those storms so that we have fewer contaminants going into surface water. We have fewer overflow scenarios. And so there's lots of ways to do that. There's just not enough money to do everything, right? So you may want to go back and actually watch the city's YouTube channel. They'll show the General Issues Committee. First of all, in the aftermath of the uproar over what happened in Shadow Creek a year ago when it was discovered, a year ago last summer, it was discovered what had been happening in Shadow Creek. And it was apparent to all of us in the summer of 2018. We're out on the creek and it looked like a barnyard. It was just solid waste matted on top of the creek. I've never seen anything so disgusting. The problem for most of the community and where the outrage came from was the fact that staff wrote up a report that the city's lawyer or an outside legal counselor advised city council to not release the report describing how this had been going on for 4.5 years. And it would come out at some point during the province's investigation, but that was the advice. And I don't think that was very good advice because, as it turns out, people went bananas when it was discovered last November that they'd been holding on to this report. And to the extent that things have been, that waste have been released into the environment. The province issued the city with 2 orders to investigate, to examine, and then report back to the city, to the province, what they were going to do about the waste in the creek and the waste out in Coutts Paradise in the marsh. And I think a lot of people are under this impression that 24 liters of sewage is just sitting out there in the marsh. And of course, that's not the case. But there still is physical material that would have settled in the bottom. You have sedimentation there on top of who knows what from the last 150 years of contaminants going into that creek. Just so you know the background of that stretch of Shadow Creek from Coutts Paradise at Princess Point back along the 403, there was a steel mill. It was a big steel factory where the Dunduran Fortinos is today. That whole parking lot, that whole plaza was a steel company for many decades. The city's landfill was right where the soccer fields at Cage Park are. That's the whole thing under there is a landfill. And then, of course, you have all the industry that was once in West Hamilton, where the Innovation Park is now. And you have the highway running through that valley and the channelization. I mean, it's a very, very malign. And so this, the city was tasked with trying to figure out, well, how do we figure out, I guess, what was the result of this spill, this leak, as opposed to all of the historical injury to the creek as well. And there was a recommendation from a consultant that said, you know what, we're probably going to do more damage, cause more concern and damage to the ecosystem there if we stir everything up, removing that rather than leaving it there. That was one opinion. The city went with that opinion, so they sent the province this do-nothing approach, that we're going to do nothing about what happened, which politically didn't smell very good. And in the end, the province suddenly released its response, which was, no, you will not take a do-nothing approach. You have so many weeks now to report back and to get a consultant to figure out a work plan. So that's what happened. And so there was a whole flurry of activity about that. And then this was discussed at General Issues Committee at City Council. So two things. This issue about, why did the leadership of Hamilton Water and Public Works, why did they respond to the province in this way? Why didn't we say we were going to do something differently? And so there was some back and forth there. And then there was also discussed was a motion from Councillor Danko to direct staff to do a bunch of things. One of the things, for example, is to conduct an analysis of where we lack adequate infrastructure to deal with wastewater and stormwater, particularly stormwater. And during the meeting, I communicated with Councillor Danko to say that I thought that they were working on this already. And the idea of the motion was simply to hardwire that into the city's work plan. So when you engage with people at the city, the manager of a program, for example, something to do with water safety, there are people that look after recreational water quality at the city of Hamilton, for example, in Public Works. So they are very narrowly focused on delivering what they are responsible for. And it's nice that I have the capacity to look around at all kinds of different issues, but they really don't. They are taxed to the limit to look very narrowly at what they do. And so it's very easy to find people in the city at Public Works, at Public Health, at Parks and Recreation, in other areas, planning, for example. So there's 4 different divisions, and they almost never have an opportunity to talk to each other. So one thing that BARC has done in the last year is initiate a watershed advisory group. The name, the WAG, is what the name of this committee, through the remedial action plan. And the idea is to provide an opportunity for these agencies to come together to work on these larger issues. Not because people who work at the City of Hamilton or the federal or provincial governments or at McMaster or wherever, it's not because we don't all share the same goal. It's because we all have different mandates. And some of those mandates are very broad and some are very narrow. And so you will find yourself, when you're talking to people at the city, it may feel like you're being, you want to talk about an issue like climate. You may feel like you're being passed off to somebody else and then to somebody else. Well, those other people can speak to those aspects, right? And so the city, as you probably know, because you're working on climate resiliency, the city's declared a climate emergency. They have come up with a staff action plan to address this. You probably know the, I can see good with faces, but not as good with names. Just trying to get his name now, but I'm sure that, the fellow that wrote the city's plan, it went to council last 2019 at some point. about a year, maybe 15 months ago or so. And there are various aspects to that you will want to engage with, right? Depending on angle that you're looking at.
That was great. Yeah, I think you covered a lot of bases, and we had questions that cover a lot of different topics, but I think that covered a lot of what we wanted to ask. I guess I would quickly just want to ask, how does BARC engage with the city of Hamilton, and what your thoughts are on this relationship? Is there anything that you would want to change, or anything that you feel like is not being properly covered in terms of the
Yes, I would
relationship?
change the amount of money that we're granted. I would make it bigger. That's what I would do if I had the power.
Okay.
BARC needs a lot more money. Recommendation number one. The relationship between granting agencies like a foundation, a government agency, and a grantee like a charity like the one I run is it's a two-way street. Government agencies cannot implement things in the community to a significant degree. They cannot find success throughout the community simply by having bureaucrats implement some program. They have to have, especially as you move from City Hall to Queen's Park to Parliament Hill. As government spans a larger area, it moves further and further away from being on the ground and really embedded in what's happening. So, and responsive in a way that most of the a lot of what happens from the province and from the feds comes out of Toronto, for example, whereas city councillors all live here. You might see them at the grocery store, for example, right? So there's a difference in the degree of scale, not only in terms of the mandates, constitutional mandates for things being either provincial or whatever, but also in terms of the intimacy of the services provided, right? Seriously, there's a degree of connectedness there, right? Part of what BARC does, both as a grantee and as a member of the remedial action plan that is small, and we don't own the property where the stormwater is falling on. The city owns that, or residents of the city own that as private property, or the Conservation Authority, or the Royal Botanical Gardens, or the Government of Ontario owns it. We don't own it. So we don't have the ability to control projects on lands that we don't own. We can only influence what they do, but we also work in the public interest. We have a public good or a public interest mandate. And so by carefully cultivating a reputation for doing certain things and saying certain things and bringing a certain perspective to things, we play an important, if not small, role through the work that we do, through education, but also through political outreach, for example. So in terms of the work that we do with the city as a corporation wants the rest of the city as a geographical area, as a place for residents to live and be healthy and be proud of. They don't have enough staff to do all of that stuff. And frankly, they're not that good at doing certain things. They're really good at doing certain things and not good at other things. And so they need partners that provide other services in the community. And so we partner in that way. We add value to the responsibilities of the corporation in the sense that we are educating citizens. We're providing information for them to better understand the complexity of the problems that the city of Hamilton as a corporation is faced with and it tries to deal with, right? People generally want the water to be cleaner. And so it's good for the city to have allies, for example, in trying to create a perspective in how to see these problems. A lot of people, when they first hear about the issue in Cheatle Creek, 24 billion liters, you could have said 24,000 liters, and it would have had the same impact on many, many people who don't really have much relationship with the natural world. They don't have much relationship with water. They turn on the tap and they flush the toilet. Water comes in and goes out through their bathroom or their kitchen, and they don't really notice much else. Well, 24 billion or 24,000, that's a significant difference, obviously. But when you say it out loud in the headline, the impact of that the emotional impact of that, without a really solid understanding of environmental science, for example, the impact of that is going to be very great. And it's difficult to counter that kind of, and to not only to counter misunderstandings, but you want to channel all of that enthusiasm. Get everybody worked up about something, you want to take advantage of that. Absolutely. So what's happened, for example, since the last year is that the city of Hamilton's hired some people, which the councillors never want to do because that's just more expense. That means they have to collect more taxes, and that's the worst thing that a councillor has to deal with is people getting upset about their taxes. That's where people around the horseshoe table at City Hall, all the councillors have to agree on how much they're going to charge people through property taxes to run things. And the more things you do, the more things you have to collect. And if you want to collect less money, you have to spend less of it, and you have to do fewer things. And part of what the city accomplishes through grants to BARC, for example, is that we are a fantastic value for money. By supporting, they don't pay for all of what we do. They're one of many agencies and foundations and corporations that we go to for financial support. They contribute to all the work that we do, and in that, they get to benefit from things that we would do, for example. So, for example, I sent the Spectator an op-ed piece, and a lot of it was about what the province is threatening to do to conservation authorities, which is bad. But some of it, in trying to turn attention to things that are more hopeful, some of it was just catching people up on what's happened in the last year. So a year ago, I wrote an op-ed for the paper, and I went on the radio a couple of times to talk about the impact of the spill and why people are upset and what needed to happen in the next year. So this was sort of getting people caught up in that. The city's hired some people to help figure out what the problems are with infrastructure, how to propose solutions to fix those things, how to better measure water quality, respond to problems in the future. These would all have been good to have had ages ago, but sometimes, it takes somebody having an accident to get a stop sign at the end of your street. Same sort of thing. Like I said at the beginning of our discussion, right? It's never really been a great business case for stormwater management. It's really taken a long, long time. There are actually historical eras of how we've dealt with stormwater in the past. And that's evolving now. And there are agencies that are doing stuff. They're not really in the Hamilton Harbor watershed, unfortunately. The really progressive stuff is happening, not surprisingly, in Toronto, and the Toronto Conservation Authority. Also, Credit Valley is well known for being sort of on the leading edge of doing stuff. And so in places like Hamilton, the people from the staff from those agencies get invited to come here and explain what they're doing to people here and try and boost what we're doing here. So that's sort of the back and forth, the give and take of government and non-governmental. We need each other. The problem also, I'll just highlight one more thing, where people were and continue to be very upset about what happened in Shadow. I will tell you that I'm not so sure that the number of people with their hair on fire on Twitter is the same as the number of people who are enraged by what happens. I don't know if there's a good correlation between those things or not. And of course, a lot of people pay attention to what's going on Twitter, maybe, without having a really good understanding of how people are feeling about what happened. I'm sure that a lot of people were very, very upset. I was very, very upset, but of course I work on this stuff. But I know that my neighbors who don't work on this stuff, I know that they were pretty disgusted with what happened too. And if it's, we talked earlier about how do you take the pulse of what's happening? How do you gauge and assess, right? How do you measure? The editors of the Spectator ran 3 full pages over 3 days of letters to the editor, not one of them going in favor of the city. They were all unanimously outraged about what had happened. That has literally never happened before. They've got this unified voice from the community. They've never printed that number of letters before. My op-ed basically said, a year ago, said that we were really disappointed. And we are. We still got our city grant this year to do the stuff that we do. I would like to think that the people who support us in doing the work that we do in the community aren't going to be too upset that we're really disappointed with what happened. But it's also, when you're getting 3 pages of letters and Twitter set its hair on fire, I'm not going to help the situation by adding one more voice to that outrage. That box has been checked. What we did was try to provide a reasonable look at what had happened and why. And everyone can appreciate making mistakes. Sometimes you make a mistake because, I was late getting there because my car broke down because, I didn't fill it with gas. Well, that's negligence. But, I didn't have enough money to buy a reliable car. Well, that's a more complicated problem than just not bothering to fill it with gas, right? Both of those examples, you still were late for the thing, whatever, right? You were still late. The impact is still the same, but it's good to work through like negligence versus accident. And then also, what can we do to get a more reliable car for the next time? What are all the different things that we can do in order to assure that we arrive on time next time, or we get there, we increase our chances that we're not going to be late. If you get my my analogy, right? So this has been the conversation. I think that it's useful, that people are very upset. It is reassuring. Unfortunately, when the Spectator ran our picture when the story went in the paper in the summer, July or August, I think, of 2018, that's when the waste was floating on the river. It was disgusting. And people were generally not outraged at that point. This is another, I think, fine point to kind of grasp in all of this. People weren't really outraged at that point. We didn't get the 3 pages of letters to the editor about the fact that the sewer system overflowed for so long and then turned the creek into a barnyard. It happened when it was divulged secretly to the newspaper that council had been sitting for over a year on a report that described what had happened. And I guess it's only a handful of people like me that are actually out on a boat surrounded by all of this floating waste that actually knew the extent of what had happened, right? If you're not involved in these issues like me, if you're like my neighbors who do all kinds of stuff, the guy next door works for a lumber company, the guy across the street, they're computer scientists. They know more sort of just through me. They just have a passing knowledge of this sort of thing. That's understandable, of course. The fact that they're aware of it at all is fantastic. So our job is in large part to try to broker information on behalf of the public interest. That means just setting a realistic and a reasonable context, providing perspective for people, and trying to be honest about mistakes, and also help to set a course of correction. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you for tuning in to CityCast. If you would like to share your thoughts about this episode, send us an email at citycast@citylabsir.org. We'll see you soon with part 2 of this conversation.